What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Ivora Insatiable Heir. Ivora is a 1/1 vampire warrior for 1 and a red that has trample. Whenever Ivora enters or deals combat damage to a player, create a blood token, and whenever you discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Ivora. For this deck tech, we're going to be focusing on Ivora's second ability, the discard one, trying to make her as large as possible before swinging in for lethal commander damage. So basically, a Voltron-esque theme based all around discarding cards. We'll also key in a bit on the blood generation aspect of Ivora, as well as her vampiric creature type. With that, let's get into the card highlights. For this to work, we'll need lots of discard effects to make sure we can pump Ivora up. Thankfully, since we're in red, we have quite a few options. To start out with, we have Big Score and Unexpected Windfall, 2 cards that discard 1 and draw us 2 while also making 2 treasures. You'll notice that I put these 2 cards in pretty much all of my red decks. I really can't speak highly enough of these 2. They're definitely my favorite card draw spells in red, and they work doubly as well in here since we get a discard from them as well. There's also Faithless Looting, which is a cheap way to get 2 discard effects, with the added benefit of flashback to boot. Next up, we have Pirates Pillage and Seize the Spoils, 2 more cards that functionally work the same as Big Score and Unexpected Windfall. They're sorceries, however, so while not quite as good as the other 2, still work very well in a deck like this. Demand Answers is a great modular spell in this deck. We can either use it as a discard effect, or, if we're too low on cards, opt to sacrifice an artifact instead in order to get better card advantage. Since Ivora makes blood tokens, we'll have easy access to sacrificable artifacts, making this a great option. Since we want discard in mass, we can also use wheel effects to get a huge burst in power for Ivora. We have the namesake of the effect, Wheel of Fortune, as one potential option. Now, Wheel of Fortune is a reserve list card and is extremely expensive monetarily, so consider this one optional. Still, if you're okay with proxying or have one already, this is a great include as a source of both discard and card draw. Reforge the Soul is functionally the same as Wheel of Fortune, with the added benefit of having Miracle, letting you cast it for super cheap if you draw it first in a turn. Change of Fortune requires you to already have a hand to get the card draw, but is still a good source of discard in those situations where you have a full grip. We also have Decaying Time Loop and Fateful Showdown, which also require you to have a hand in order to draw, but are good in those situations. Fateful Showdown has an added benefit of doubling as a removal spell, or just player burn, equal to the number of cards you do have, giving you a nice bonus to casting it. Ox of Agonis isn't 100% a wheel effect, but is great in situations where we have few or no cards in hand, since we'll be able to always get 3 out of it no matter what. Not to mention, it has Escape, which can be useful if we want a recursive discard effect at any given time. Alongside Ivora, we have a number of other cards we can use to benefit from discarding. Braylon Skyshark Rider and Glinthorn Buccaneer both deal damage to our opponents whenever we discard a card, letting us do a ton of damage if we cast a wheel while either are out. The Buccaneer also doubles as a discard outlet, letting us effectively discard a card for every 2 mana we can pay. Surly Badger Sort is basically like a red version of Waste Knot, getting us an advantage depending on what type of card we discard. Lands turning into treasure is especially beneficial, since it'll let us temporarily ramp and make those land discards even more of an effective strategy. Inti Seneschal of the Sun and Conspiracy Theorist both allow us to effectively impulse draw whenever we discard cards, with Inti being the real deal while Conspiracy Theorist lets us specifically cast one of the discarded cards. Bag of Holding is a great way to get back those cards that are discarded, while also functioning as a discard source itself. Admittedly, it would likely be better to forego using the bag's draw discard effect, just so you can keep it up at all times in case an opponent tries to remove it without getting the benefit from it. Since we'll be discarding cards, we can take advantage of an ability that specifically cares about discarding, Madness. Now, cards with Madness aren't always the greatest, especially ones that are only in red, but we do have a few that work well with the overall theme of our deck. Stencia Masquerade not only gives our Ivora first strike, allowing it to be even more effective in combat. Since she's a vampire, it also lets us make our Ivora even bigger whenever we're able to connect with her. Angie's Ravager is great because it has the same discard effect as the Ox of Agonis, just on attack rather than entering. This is even more beneficial since it allows us to more easily re-trigger it multiple times over the course of it being on the battlefield. Anger is a great way to give your army haste, and works especially great in decks where you can easily discard it to get it into the graveyard. Since discarding is what this deck is all about, Anger is a no-brainer include with Ivora. Key to the City does pretty much everything we want. It lets us discard a card, while also making a creature unblockable, both great effects for Ivora. Not only that, it gives us an additional source of card draw, which is something we'll need to make sure we can consistently discard. The Spear of Leonidas gives us modular options on what we want whenever we attack. If Ivora is already big enough, then the double strike will be perfect. Otherwise, it can be another great source of discard draw if we want to make Ivora bigger. Since most of our discard effects are spells, we can also have a pseudo spellslinger theme in the deck. Specifically, the types of cards that deal damage to our opponents whenever we cast a non-creature spell. For this we have Firebrand Archer and Kessig Flamebreather, two quintessential spellslinger cards that will deal a damage to each of our opponents on non-creature spellcast. We also have Gutter Snipe, which will instead do 2 damage, but is specific to instants and sorceries. Since most of our discard effects are going to be instants or sorceries, all of these cards make for good additional ways to burn down our opponents. Finally, there are some good utility cards that work well with our theme. Similar to the Spellslinger cards, since we have mostly instants and sorceries at our disposal, Mizzix's Mastery is a great include to be able to freely recast all of the discard draw spells we've played. This is also an amazing way to quickly ramp up Ivora's power later in the game, in cases where you need to recast her after being killed. Crucible of Worlds will make all of those lands we discard to effects still usable, giving us more incentive to discard lands without needing to worry about missing a land drop. Since we'll be making blood tokens with Ivora, Arterial Alchemy is a great include to turn them into equipment that we can, in turn, use to buff Ivora and create even more blood tokens. This makes these blood tokens more useful than simply as a relatively bad discard draw effect. Psychosis Crawler will be able to do a ton of damage in this deck, since all of our discard effects also let us draw cards back. As a matter of fact, this deck is as much a card draw deck as it is a discard deck, making the Crawler an easy auto-include. Fling will be great in those situations where we have a large Ivora and simply want to kill off an opponent with normal damage, or when Ivora is about to be killed, since we can respond with Fling to make use of her power before she dies. Jaya Ballard provides quite a few advantages to us in this deck, with all 3 of her abilities, since we'll likely always want mana to cast our discard effects, or simply another recursive discard draw effect that will persist on the battlefield. Here's an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include many more discard draw effects, like Thrill of Possibility and Cathartic Reunion, Ramp in Jessica's Will and Mana Geyser, and protection effects for Ivora in Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. You'll also notice a few more interesting cards in this list, specifically around non-basic lands. That's right, this deck list includes Blood Moon and Price of Progress. I'm a major proponent of Blood Moon type effects in Commander, as I believe people rely far too much on utility lands in lieu of simple basics. Unless it's a 4 or 5 color deck, there's really no reason to not run a number of basics, and these 2 cards help further relay that point to people. Not everyone may agree with this mindset, but I absolutely love having these cards in mono red decks, so always include them. I think Ivora has a lot of potential to be a great commander. Red has quite a few ways to discard cards, especially since it's the primary source of the rummaging mechanic, so making Ivora big will be very easy to do. That being said, I do also think that Ivora being mono red is a downside as well. The best ways to discard a lot of cards at once generally come in the form of wheel effects, and while red does have quite a few number of wheels, there are other colors that also excel at doing this. Just imagine if Ivora was Grixis colored instead, that is, red, blue, and black. This would open the door to so many more spells and possibilities that would really let you take advantage of her discard ability. Still, mono red is probably the best mono color that Wizards could have made her with this ability, so I can't complain too much. Another thing to keep in mind with discard-centric themes is that of card advantage. While you may be drawing cards, it's important to remember that, most of the time, you aren't going up in the number of cards in your hand, rather staying at a consistent number. Think about Big Score. With this, you discard 1 to draw 2. Sounds like an advantage, right? Well, you have to remember that you're also casting the spell itself, so you're really having 2 cards go to the graveyard, keeping you at parity. You'll naturally play lands and other spells, so your hand will continue to decrease while casting these discard spells. Due to this, it's very important to play out your hand carefully. Make sure you have cards in hand to discard, and also some to keep in reserve in case Ivora gets killed. Regardless of this, if discarding attacks and attacking with a big commander is something you enjoy, I'd strongly suggest trying out this deck. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Ivora Insatiable Heir. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the Architect link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.